Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Welcome to a very special series that's new to the channel, A Day in the Life aboard RMS Titanic. And today, we are somewhere very special. This is Harland & Wolff in Belfast. This is where Titanic was built. Everybody knows Harland & Wolff, the shipbuilders. And of course, everybody knows its managing director in 1912 was Mr. Thomas Andrews. Now, this is a semi-fictitious rail journey that one might have taken on a car right down the middle of town to get to the shipyard. Today, we will be living a day in the life as Thomas Andrews, and I thought it would be apt to start here. This is the third demo by Titanic Honor and Glory. It's from 2017, and it's spectacular because it begins in the heart of where Titanic was built, and ultimately we're going to end up boarding the ship as Thomas Andrews. Now, to get to Titanic, Thomas Andrews probably wouldn't have taken this journey. He lived in Belfast. He was a local. We're just going past the Arroll gantry. You might have seen that over there on the left, which was the big, essentially the crane system that was set up to build the ship. But we have arrived here at the fitting out wharf because this is where Titanic departed Belfast from to get to Southampton. And I thought it would be interesting to start this day in the life by getting a little bit inside Thomas Andrews' head. So who was Thomas Andrews? Just a little bit of background. He was from Coimbra, Ireland. He was a really kind of a prodigy, actually, in ship design. He had been at Harland & Wolff for many years. We're going to walk to the Titanic and talk about Thomas Andrews real quick. What a beautiful sight. Magnificent. Behind us is the shipyard that actually built the ship. So we might go and have a quick look. Come around here, you'll be able to see the entrance to the Thompson graving dock. Right here. This would have been emptied. Titanic could have been sat there for work to be done on the propellers or the anti-foul, all that kind of thing. And all the way over there in the background, you can see the Arroll gantry. Now, these were spaces that Thomas Andrews would have been extremely familiar with. He'd been with the shipyard for quite some time. He'd joined in the late 19th century. He was kind of a sporting guy. He loved rugby, cricket. He was very much a well-to-do kind of Northern Irishman who proved to be extremely good at building ships. So he joined Harland & Wolff and essentially rose through the ranks and started off basically visiting every single one of the many, many, many dozens of shops and various workshops around the yard that did very different things in regards to shipbuilding. The painting shops, the woodworking shops, the drawing offices. And so, by the turn of the 20th century, he had essentially become one of the key figures in the yard, and he'd done it the hard way. This isn't really just a story of nepotism. There were some family connections there, but he was a very gifted and talented man. He was also a very nice guy. A lot of people seemed to like him. When he was lost, a book was written about him, and it detailed his life before Titanic, which is well worth a read because it was written back in 1912. It's in the public domain. You can go and read it. I'll provide a link. But anyway, we are going to kind of retrace his steps. That was creepy. We're going to retrace his steps and board the Titanic and go to his stateroom. Because when Titanic was preparing to leave at the very start of April in 1912, just like this, he would have gone aboard and got set up because it was tradition for Thomas Andrews and a small group of Harland & Wolff team members called the Guarantee Group to attend the maiden voyage, just make sure everything was going okay, and even take some notes on what could be improved for the next ship in the series. Of course, at this point, with Titanic finished, there were already plans in place for the successor, Britannic. So we're going to see what kind of notes Thomas Andrews was taking to improve the ships. Now, we don't really exactly know kind of necessarily how he might have got aboard. There's a big gangway right here going up to sea deck at the stern. He well knew his way around the ship, so he probably could have boarded any one of these just fine if he wanted to. This area would have been pretty rammed. This would have been just a scene of chaos. Titanic was kind of only just being finished around this stage. So the ship had undergone her trials, and even then, there were things that hadn't been completed. The painting work, some of the trim, they were still doing some polishing. And Thomas Andrews was overseeing all of it. It was a huge rush and a huge stress to get these ships finished in time. We are going to be headed for that gangway right there, the big D-deck door. The Titanic Honor and Glory guys deliberately made this as difficult as possible to figure out where you need to go. But we do get a really beautiful look at the side of Titanic here. So yeah, we're going to be going in here. And interestingly, Thomas Andrews, as a executive with Harland & Wolff, as a trusted partner of the White Star Line, was entrusted with a first-class cabin, a very fine first-class cabin at that. We will see that in a minute, as soon as I can figure out how to get on board. Andrews was beloved around the yard. You can see it in many accounts. He referred to a lot of the workers as his mates. He really, really felt a deep affection for them, and they returned it as well. And this is the fruit of his and others' labour. Andrews was instrumental in the design of Olympia and Titanic, but what's interesting is that there were others who headed up many of the particulars before him. So those would have included Harland & Wolff executives like, Alexander Carlisle, William Peary. They had the particulars drawn up according to what White Star Line wanted from this new ship. And from that, Titanic was born. And it was really up to Thomas Andrews to kind of, take that idea and make it into reality. So here we go. We are Thomas Andrews today, and we are going to board Titanic and prepare for our departure from Belfast for Southampton. Great, so we are now aboard the ship, and what we're going to do is we're going to go and find our stateroom. We'll just inspect. Whoop! Might need to get some of the electricians up to fix that. So Thomas Andrews was heavily involved in walking around the vessel, inspecting it, making sure that everything was in working order, because as you can imagine, for a new ship, things could inevitably go wrong. There would be teething troubles, and he knew that. With Olympic, there had been. They had learned all kinds of lessons from Olympic. We'll go over some of those in a minute. This is the first-class grand staircase, and because Andrews had a first-class cabin, he would have been very familiar with this area. Here's the purser's office. What we're going to do is go back towards the stern of the ship. This way is forward. This way is backward. We're going to go down this very, very, very long hallway. So I can show you... Ooh, poke your head in there. I can show you the very cool stateroom that Andrews had. Let's go. So we are at the foot of the aft first-class grand staircase. So we go up here to B deck. We have the reception room for the restaurant, which we will come back to in a moment. But if we come up here, we come to the lovely aft grand staircase entrance with the dome. And over here on the ship's port side is one of the coolest cabins on the ship, one which Andrews had to himself. This is A36. And you can see we've actually already checked in, or maybe one of our very kind and helpful assistants, one of our many assistants, our secretary, has dropped off Titanic's blueprints for us, as well as a set of our tools, which we would never go without on a voyage. So this is the stateroom that Andrews had. It was actually really equipped for 3 people. As you can see, there's bunk there, and then one of the folding berths over here. So exactly how Andrews had it configured, we don't know for certain, but this is where he would have stayed. And it is a very cool stateroom for reasons that we'll go into in a minute. It's quite unusual. It's not one of the most lavish rooms on the ship. He didn't have the most luxurious first-class staterooms on Titanic, but he did have one of the most interesting because of its location. If we want to go out in the morning and go and, begin our day, we're just going to have to walk out here and we're already in amongst the rooms, first class, all the public areas. Then interestingly, the other reason why this is great is because through this door here, we have our own toilet, which is fantastic. We've got our own WC. It's right in here. It's not a very private room, which is what's interesting. Andrews was a relatively private guy. But it's one of the rooms that has probably some of the most natural light for a first class room. We've got this nice big first class window here looking out into the A-deck promenade. So Andrews would have come aboard, stowed his many suits and shirts and collars in his wardrobe here. He would have had his dinner suit as well. We'll get into that in a minute. And he would have had all of his goodies, his notes, his plans. He would have crammed it all in here as quickly as possible and then set about rushing around, hurrying to finish Titanic in time for the maiden voyage. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to rush out there, not boss everybody around, but make sure everything's getting done. And then we're going to be ready for our first day at sea. Okay, so we have departed from Belfast. We've made it to Southampton. We've got the ship ready. We've rushed and we've hurried. And now we are at sea aboard Titanic en route for New York. It is 7 o'clock in the morning. We have just woken up to breakfast in our stateroom. So interestingly, Thomas Andrews, again, being kind of like a private guy, he's in an interesting capacity on board the ship because he's a company man. So he's not there to just, goof off and have a good time. He's going to be in the public eye for reasons that we'll get into in a minute, but he's really not there to socialize with passengers. He's there to get a job done. So really you get a sense of a guy who's taking every opportunity that he can to just focus on his work. So he starts his day by having breakfast in his stateroom, around about 7 a.m., supposedly fresh fruit and coffee. He'd have it in here, stewards would bring it up for him, and he would get dressed for the day. Andrews seemed to be a fan of the butterfly collar. It was like an upright, detachable collar with the tips folded down and just a standard necktie around the base of the collar. A little bit more old-fashioned, really, that style. So, he's just a honest, hard-working guy. He's not very ostentatious, but he also had a bedroom steward who would have helped him get dressed if he needed it. Maybe not so much in the morning, but definitely at dinner time. So we've had breakfast at 7 o'clock and we're going to begin our day. Now, Andrews is a really interesting character because he is one of the few people that would have had cause to go everywhere around the ship, not just in the public spaces, but also into the bowels of the ship, into the engine rooms, all around, to do his job. And, this is unique because even the ship's senior officers didn't really have much cause to go into passenger spaces. Bruce Ismay would have been a nuisance in the engine room and the boiler rooms, and he probably stayed away, right? So even Captain Smith, I know captains were, social creatures. They kind of had to be in order to do their job. They're also an ambassador for the line, but, they were often trying to avoid as many unnecessary interactions with passengers as possible. Thomas Andrews, he has his remit basically involves him going everywhere through the ship to check things, to make notes, to take ideas down for what should be improved on Titanic and also improved for the Britannic, which was coming down the line, coming on later on. So early in the morning, he's kind of emerged from his cabin here, and probably just taken a moment to admire the beautiful handiwork of his team at Harland & Wolff, the carpenters. Unfortunately, the notes, obviously, that Andrews was taking for the Titanic have been lost to history, but we know that he was walking around with a notebook the entire time, taking things down and making suggestions. What we do have, thanks to the work of researchers like Mark Chirnside and Bruce Beveridge, is a pretty comprehensive list of the notes he took for Olympic on her maiden voyage. So we're going to run through those and walk around Titanic and kind of just do some of the things that Andrews might have done as he walked around and did his note-taking. So now we have to begin our day by going down another long corridor. In fact, we're going to go for a jog down this corridor to save some time. But we're going to go to one of the most popular areas on the ship and see the kinds of changes that Andrews suggested. So you kind of get the sense of this guy being like a quiet observer, you know what I mean? Taking all in, seeing how people enjoyed the space, what they liked, what they didn't like. Now, on Olympic's maiden voyage, the reception room down here was host to concerts by the ship's band. You can actually see the pianos set up over there in the corner with music stands. And it proved to be so popular that it brought the entire area to a halt. And Even more importantly, though, there wasn't enough room. So there were actually reports of first-class passengers in their beautiful clothes sitting on the steps of the grand staircase listening to this music. So, to quote verbatim from Andrews, from his notebook from Olympic's maiden voyage in 1911, he said, "The first-class reception room being the most popular room in the first-class passenger accommodation, being more or less crowded after lunch and dinner, also for afternoon tea, 4:30 p.m, it was found necessary to bring up all the spare cane chairs from the baggage room to provide temporary seating accommodation. Would strongly recommend additional permanent cane furniture being ordered, as smoking is allowed at all times in the reception room, an exhaust fan drawing the fore and after girder, port and starboard as in the saloon." So what's really interesting is that Andrews has noted that smoking is allowed at all times in this room. Maybe they should bring in an exhaust fan. But the issue is with this room, it was already quite hot and stuffy. You know, it's not a very tall space. And unlike other ships, there isn't this, tall vaulted ceiling for all that smoke to accumulate. So it looks like the solution was instead to ask for passengers to smoke only after lunch for the comfort of other passengers. But interestingly, the other thing that Andrews does with this note is when they go to visit Titanic's design after Olympic, they shrink the entrance over here, this entrance vestibule for first-class passengers coming aboard. They shrink it down just basically to provide more space. So you can see in here, this is actually reduced off of Olympic's configuration in her maiden voyage. It would have come out to here as well. So you can see it's just been opened up. They've added more furniture and they've just made it a larger and more welcoming space so that people don't have to sit on the chairs and not choke and smoke as well. Now, the reception room served really as a kind of light refreshment gathering place, and you can just imagine Andrews walking around. And also, while this room is deserted, we're going to come in here and take a look inside the dining saloon, because we might have some ideas on how to improve this as well. So, of course, the first-class dining saloon has to cater for all the first-class passengers aboard. It's a very big space. So if you come down here, we will see a set of big double doors right here, and another one on the other side, port and starboard. We come around here, and we see another one. Now, these lead directly into the huge, voluminous first-class galley, the kitchen that was necessary for pumping out all those beautiful meals for the first-class dining saloon. But what's interesting is on Olympic, there had originally been another set of doors over here. So there were, in theory, doors for going in and out of the kitchen. But Andrews made a note of that. He said, the two single serving doors, port and starboard, from the pantry to the first-class saloon do not appear to be necessary for service, and they're better kept shut owing to noise. You can imagine all the rustling, the plates clinking, everything like that. Now, the space in way of these doors will provide accommodation for one additional 4-seater table, both port and starboard in the saloon. And sure enough, if we come down here and have a look, we can see right here where the door would have been, there is indeed an additional 4-seater table. So they're small changes, but the only way that Andrews could have known that is from taking his meals in here and maybe sitting around and seeing that that door wasn't being used for service, that this one big double door was enough, and that the noise was too much, especially for people sitting over here closer to the galley. So they deleted it on Titanic, and that change is reflected right there. Okay, so we've come up one deck. We've finished up in the reception room and the dining saloon, and we're going to have a little inspection of one of the finer suites on board the ship, right next to the purser's office here. We're just going to go in here and have a little look. This is C55, as the little note very helpfully tells us. Very beautifully appointed, as you can see. Fortunately, the cabin's occupants are out. Now, Andrews would have been inspecting these, obviously, if they were not occupied. And there were quite a few first-class staterooms not occupied when Titanic set out. But the C deck suites like this are quite unique because they've got adjoining sitting rooms like this here, you can see, is purely for sitting. But if you come in here and look in the bathroom, this is what's really cool about this space. It's got its own ensuite toilet, just like our stateroom back at A36. It has its own toilet there, and it's got its own shower and running water and a sink and everything. And this is huge because this is a time when, people didn't have their own bathrooms. People, when they traveled, they were quite used to having to go out into the hallways and use a communal heads. But Andrew's notes were quite extensive. And he made a note here. You can see that there is a a various array of holders for, your shaving creams and things like that. He made the note that for the Olympic, the sponge holders should be fitted to the private rooms, private bathrooms on B and C decks, where these have been omitted. So as you can see, it's a very fine eye for detail. It was very convenient to have your sponge and your soap actually fitted inside these little holders, because the ship moves around, and you might find, especially your soap, you don't want that on the ground because it might be slipping around and you could very easily trip over. He also made a note around the electric reading lamps that were fitted to the ship. So you can see that there's actually quite a lot of artificial illumination in here. We've got quite a few electric lamps. And we also have the switches and knobs, the various call knobs for stewards, and also the switches for the lamps down here. But Andrews made the note that backplates should be set in for the electric reading lamps, fitted over beds in suites and staterooms on B and C decks, and the same in ordinary cabins. So he's obviously spent a lot of time actually inspecting these rooms, as we are doing right now. It's probably getting on about, lunchtime. Unfortunately, I don't really know where Andrews took his lunch. I don't know that it has been recorded or if there was a passenger statement about where he might have eaten his lunch. But sure enough, he would have worked up an appetite, because walking around the ship, going through these public spaces, figuring out how to improve them would have been quite a lot. We are going to head back down to the stern of the ship. We're now going for a jog. I don't imagine that Thomas Andrews would have been jogging to the stern area of the ship, but we are going for a quick jog to speed up some time. And we are going to have a look at one more very popular place aboard the ship. No doubt Thomas Andrews would have actually spent quite a bit of time back here, because this is an area that underwent a huge amount of change on Olympic and Titanic. We've got the Café Parisien and the first class restaurant down here, commonly referred to as the a la carte restaurant, the Ritz restaurant. You ordered off the menu. It was a kind of a big deal. I'll explain in a sec. Now, on Olympic, originally this space did not exist. This was just a through and through promenade that took you all the way to the stern that way and all the way up to the bow that way. But on Titanic, they came up with a very clever idea of turning this into a very light, fine space known as the Café Parisien. It's obviously extremely beautiful. These were very popular on ships at the time. Veranda cafes, anything like that made it feel like a light, airy garden were extremely popular. Very Edwardian, but also still very pretty. I can imagine actually a place like this would do very well today, selling tea and scones and things. But where a lot of Andrew's notes on Olympic really come to the fore are in here, in the restaurant. Now, this is obviously a very beautiful space. The idea of having a restaurant aboard the ship that was separate to the saloon was totally really new for the time. Nowadays, of course, ships are chock full of restaurants where you go in and order all these, whatever you want off the menu that are separate to what you might get included in your fare. In Titanic's day, this was a huge revolutionary concept. It was a real selling point. And on Olympic, they had just included this very, very small restaurant. So it proved to be so successful that Andrews had to make some changes. So his notes from Olympic's maiden voyage suggest that he came in here, inspected, took his dinner up here, I would presume, just to get a sense of how people were interacting with the space and using it. He said, I would propose fitting 11 additional 4-seated tables in the first class restaurant. This room being short of table accommodation. Now, this was ultimately extended aboard Olympic, but Titanic's was built with these changes already in place. It was much larger. And Mark Chirnside, in his great article about Thomas Andrews' notes on the Olympic, suggests as well that actually, in the case of Britannic, the room was expanded even more, and it took over the Café Parisien. It was that popular. But one of the key features of this beautiful space is this huge buffet back here. And again, Thomas Andrews' eye for detail comes in. He made the suggestion of fitting a screen. So he said a screen to be fitted, or rather a screen to be an improvement if fitted on the side of the restaurant buffet, the entrance door, so as to prevent passengers from seeing behind the buffet, which is quite cool. And you can see how elaborate a lot of this detailing is, like the doors, the screens and things that have been put into place. Quite clever. So yeah, this was staffed entirely by a a team of restaurateurs separate to the White Star Line. They were very experienced chefs. They were lost to a man when the ship sank. And they were neither passengers nor crew. It's rather a sad story. But they were very proud chefs. The food must have been absolutely exquisite. You can imagine that eating in here would have been really a delight. So maybe we take our lunch or maybe a light refreshment in the Café Parisien, because we still have a big day ahead of us. We've got a big afternoon before we have to get ready for dinner. So we'd maybe take our food up in our stateroom as we did with breakfast, or maybe we'd just have something light down here, coffee and a sandwich or something, before cracking on. Because Thomas Andrews didn't just have to run around looking at passenger spaces. He also had to make sure that the mechanics of the ship, the various spaces for the crew, they all worked harmoniously as well. And there's a really interesting example of that, which we'll go and have a look at now. So we're now in second class. Again, Thomas Andrews is just able to transcend classes because he, is he's got these almost, dev admin powers aboard the ship. And we've come through second class. We're not really going to be spending any time here because we're actually heading out here to the stern of the ship. And what we just did, passengers were not allowed to do. These were doors only for the use of crew, because now we are in third class. So this is the exposed third class promenade aft at the well deck. And what's really interesting is a few of Thomas Andrews' notes on the Olympic pertain to the stern of the ship, which we're just going to talk about now. The operation of the ship from the docking bridge has been kind of a matter of some contention. A lot of people have said that the wheel that you can see up there was purely really a backup in case the forward wheel, the main helms, failed, which is really true. The forward wheel relied on a telemotor to speak to the rudder through the steering engines. This wheel was essentially connected directly to the steering engines because they are directly beneath our feet, and that is what would turn the rudder. The idea that you would use the docking bridge for docking for a long time has been said that was a misnomer. It was purely for backup. But what's really interesting is Thomas Andrews made a couple of notes on this. So he said, specifically in Liverpool, when docking or undocking stern first, the pilot is always on the docking bridge, and this practice should be carried out in Southampton. Now, the reason he had said that was because they early on were nosing Olympic directly in to the berth, and her stern was essentially pointing out into Southampton water. Now, they changed that in the end, and basically when Titanic departed, her stern was facing the town and her bow was facing the other way. But early on, it was assumed that the ship should be operated by the pilot, who takes direct control of the ship from the docking bridge back here. And that, you can understand why, because we have such a great, clear, unobstructed view. Were the ship to be traveling that way in reverse, coming out of the berth, we would obviously want to make sure that we can come down here. We've got a handy speaking tube, and we can look down all the way forward, all the way aft to make sure we're clear, and then begin the maneuver by letting go the lines. We can use this telegraph here, slack away starboard, not clear starboard. We can communicate with the bridge, and then we can actually engage the engines from here and move the ship out with our own two hands. Not Thomas Andrews, obviously, the pilot. But Thomas Andrews made that point, which I thought was really interesting. So you could use the docking bridge for docking, or more likely undocking. But again, very specific circumstances, only in Southampton, presumably when she was going in the old-fashioned way, which they scrapped almost immediately. And then in Liverpool, and really, Olympic did not operate from Liverpool. So how often that would have been a thing, we don't know, but yes, you could dock one of these ships from the docking bridge. Thomas Andrews made the point about that. Now, while we're here, we're also going to take a look at this mysterious black board down here. We have talked about these a little bit in the past. These are propeller notice boards. They were at the stern of the ship, and they said very famously, I don't know why this has become famous or iconic, but it's just such a cool little thing. But it says, "Notice, this vessel has triple screws, keep clear of blades." Now, if you're a tugboat captain, do you really need to be told that this giant, 50,000 ton ship has got massive propellers down there? Maybe not. You're probably going to stay away. It seems like this was more likely, according to Robert Reed and other researchers, it was more likely a insurance thing to say, hey, at least, if in case a tug or another boat did get pulled in to Olympic's prop wash, as did happen a tug was pulled in, that they could say, hey, you know, we can point to these propeller notice boards and say, we did have warnings up. Now, it seems like in Olympic's early career, the boards would be only slung out when she was entering or leaving port, because Thomas Andrews made a note about them. He said, would suggest propeller notice boards being permanently fitted on outside of the ship's side rails in way of the after docking bridge, as is the practice on other companies' steamers, thus saving the placing and stowing away of these boards every voyage with the corresponding destruction to the painting and the printing. So, on Olympic and Titanic both, interestingly, there are photos of Olympic on a maiden voyage with no propeller notice boards, but on Olympic and Titanic, as per the notes, they were permanently fitted to the stern of the ship. There's been some debate over what colour these were, and the general consensus is they weren't red, they were black. So those are some of Thomas Andrews' notes on the general operating of the ship, you know, how it was actually used. We're going to go to one last place to look at some of the note-taking that Thomas Andrews might have been making. And it is very far away, so excuse me while I go for a quick jog. Great, so we are now in the Firemen's area, the cruise area. A lot of you will recognize this from the video we did about Titanic's secret rooms, and it was actually your comments on that video that gave us the idea of doing this kind of like day in the life type video. But what we're going to do is we're going to go down here, because on the wreck of the ship there was a really nice touch that has been talked about quite a bit before, but I just thought we'd point this out. Andrews was a very kind chap. He was very empathetic of his mates at the yard that he called them, but also the men who worked on his ships. And they realized, you know, that being a fireman working in the ship's boiler rooms was a very hot, very sweaty job. Even though Titanic had a lot of artificial ventilation, it still must have been horrendous down there. So, you know, temperatures in the 40 degrees Celsius range, that's like 110 Fahrenheit. So he installed at the main companion stairwells where the men would have been trudging down to go and start their day, right here. The design team installed these fountains, and I don't know that any actual official note over their installation has been found, if they did it on other ships before Titanic, but James Cameron, when he was diving on the ship during the Ghost of the Abyss expedition, found these in place and touted it as really a testament to Andrews's kindness and empathetic nature. So this is a really nice touch. He's actually spent time with the men who do the most, you know, horrendous job on the ship, you know, shoveling the coal, actually working down in the boiler rooms, and he's actually listened to what that work must have been like and given them some fresh water. Interestingly, he's put it at the stairs on the way down to begin their shift, not on the way up to end it, presumably to say, hey lads, don't forget to hydrate before you do this job. So it has been a big day of running around and you know, taking notes around the ship. What we're going to do is we're going to head back to the stateroom because it's time to get ready for dinner. So now we're back down one of these insanely long corridors. Again, he must have really been getting his steps up walking around the ship. It's 6:30 odd PM, and I have to be back by 6:45 in my stateroom to meet my cabin steward Henry Etches, because his job now, don't look at that clock, ignore that clock, it's 6:45 PM, trust me. The cabin steward Henry Etches is going to be helping us dress for dinner. Now, Andrews, again, he was quiet, kind of a private guy, quite humble, but he still needed to get dressed for dinner, and he still needed to go and have dinner in the reception room. This was de rigueur Edwardian stuff. You could not escape dinner. So why did men need help getting dressed? It's actually quite a difficult process. It's very uncomfortable. The shirts that they wore back then were boiled, fronted, hard as cardboard, hard as plastic shirts with detachable collars that had to go on. a bow tie tied. When your shirt's on, you can hardly move. So, helping him with his waistcoat, helping him put his jacket on, his shoes. The uniform for the time was what we now call white tie. It was just standard uniform, really. Every man wore it. A white shirt with studs down the front and a very low cut fastened white waistcoat with black tailcoat. And so Andrews would have changed out of his day clothes for this, and then he would have gone down to the dining saloon. So presumably, it would have just been pretty easy for him to go down through here, back down along the long corridor. But maybe we can try going a different way. Maybe he would have made a point of going through here. Going through all the fine public rooms on the ship. You just imagine him all dressed up. Maybe walking through the lounge, seeing everyone having their refreshments before going to dinner. What a beautiful room this is. It's probably now, about 7:15 odd. So we'll go all the way forward. Past the reading and writing room. Go through the revolving doors. The revolving doors were great. They helped reduce draft because this particular corridor was so long it connected these two areas of the ship. Having revolving doors helped a lot with the natural draft running through the ship. And presumably he could have joined the cascade of passengers as they walked down the staircase and got ready for dinner. And interestingly, Andrews had a regular dinner companion, Dr. O'Loughlin. He was an Irishman. He'd been with the White Star Line for some time, and they always took their dinner together, except for one night, we think. But it seems like they were always seated together, having a nice dinner. So we would come down here and ended our night in the dining saloon, which we have so thoughtfully provisioned with exactly the right amount of doors. Exactly what table they were sat at, I don't know. But you can imagine them, if I had to guess, I don't think they would have been sat here. I can imagine they would have been sat maybe somewhere over in the corner. You reckon that kind of fits their kind of personality and their brand. So that's it. It's been a big, long day. We'd have a nice hearty meal. We've got a nice 2-seater table here. That seems to suit Thomas Andrews and Dr. O'Loughlin. Have our dinner and go to bed. So there you have it. It's been a long day for Thomas Andrews, and he was really busying himself, improving the ship, making suggestions. Tragically, ultimately, of course, he was lost with his latest creation when Titanic went down. And so it's really interesting to walk around the ship in Titanic Honor and Glory and get a sense of what his day must have been like, the places he went, the people he bumped into. I'll provide a link to the 2 Titanic Honor and Glory demos I included here. Mark Chernside's great article about the notes that he took on Olympic. There are a few more, but we only went over a small selection. Let us know who you'd like us to cover next time. If there are other passengers or crew that you would be interested in seeing a day in the life of, there's quite a few of them. Let us know in the comments. As always, until next time, stay safe and stay happy, and I'll see you again.